Welcome back, Flyers Nitty Gritty fans, to Getting Gritty with It with your host, Yariv, Wolok, my partner in crime, Vasili, Gianarakos. Vasili, what's up, buddy? How you doing?
Doing good, Yariv. I mean, it's getting really cold here in Canada. It's gonna snow about 25 centimeters tomorrow in Toronto, so not looking forward to that. But I am looking forward to the great guests that we have tonight and just talking some Flyers hockey. How have you been, buddy?
Pretty good, man. And it's a one time you can gloat in Philadelphia that we have better weather.
Yeah.
And obviously, our guest for the evening, first time on the show, but obviously, you guys should know who he is, Jordan Hall of NBC and Flyers Talk. Jordan, thank you so much for joining us. How you doing?
Guys, I'm doing well. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, excited to have you on. And here's the one thing I'll say about you, Jordan, that I noticed as like an outside observer. One, I love your tweets. A lot of your tweets are, you'll like grab like some interesting facts that like are kind of under the radar, and you'll point that out. And what I do like about you is you try to find what's positive in things, because like a lot of times what's negative already. Fine, okay, but let's look at the detail, because there's usually a lot more to the story. Then you don't need to go deep into analytics or any of that. You just need to look a little bit more where I think we like to attack people for consistency, but even within there, you see through the numbers, there is some success there. So I've always noticed that from Jordan. I think it reflects on a lot of your work, and I think it's a very positive and awesome thing for online coverage, which tends to be, dreadful a little bit. Not dreadful, maybe full of dread, maybe is what I'm trying to say.
No, it's true. The social media world can tend to be doom and gloom, as we all know, especially in Flyers world, where last season was a mess and this year not going much better. So, yeah, you try to be right down the middle as much as you can, and at least provide facts. If as long as it's factual and it's numbers based, I think it's hard to argue with that stuff. So, try to be as informative as possible. So, I appreciate that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's really appropriate that you come on, because right now it's kind of a tough time as Flyer fans, and just the one I've said it on this podcast before, right? But like there hasn't been a GM who's had 3 10-game losing streaks. We're like an chartered water right now, right? Like we haven't really been in this territory as Flyers fans, at least for a very long time. We have multiple seasons, and things are not looking like they're getting there out of there, and there isn't like something obvious in the minors, and there's not like that one bright hope. There's not that number one center right now or anything like that, like a Claude Giroux. It's a weird place for us to be, and I think it's appropriate you come on here, kind of help level head. Let's start off with the fact that the Flyers, though, are 3-11-4 in their last 18 games. Having said that, something we've talked about here, it might feel the same to some degree, but I don't believe it's the same as what we've seen before. But we do have a couple, I guess 3 in a row, 1-goal losses for the Flyers, 2 of which were in overtime. Let's go to the Coyotes game first, and we'll go to you first, Jordan. Coyotes, Flyers lose. They kind of, they have an opportunity to win that one. Clayton Keller gets the best of them in that one. I think that's kind of happened a few times where star players kind of taken over a game, something the Flyers lack to some degree. But, some real positives, and obviously the JVR, Frost, and Tippett line, and Frost having maybe the best game ever in a Flyers uniform. Some interesting, entertaining sides, but I'm curious of your thoughts, Jordan.
The Morgan Frost game, to me, was way bigger than the result of the game and the Flyers' big picture of it. That's a guy that they're trying to get a read on. It's a big time prove it year. He's on a 1-year deal, $800,000. The Flyers really need to figure out who he is at this level, and this is his first real crack at it in a full season, where there's no excuses. There's no he's coming back from injury, or the year was cut short because of COVID or anything like that. It's pretty much, hey, Morgan, show us what you got, 1-year deal, and we'll go from there. And he has not showed that he can score at this level yet consistently. Even this season, he has not scored in back-to-back games. I think anyone, for a guy with a scoring pedigree, they're looking at that player to score at least once in back-to-back games. He hasn't done that yet. But the fact that he breaks out for 4 points really shows you some signs of how skilled he is, how much he can play make. Now he's got to build on it. But to me, that was far bigger than losing the game. The game was secondary, in my opinion. You get Morgan Frost breaking out for 4 points and showing you a glimpse of what he can do. In the big picture, that was real promising for the Flyers. But now he's got to build on it. But to me, that was by far the biggest storyline to come from that game. If you're management for the Flyers and if you're a Flyers fan, really.
So you want to add?
Yeah, it's really well said, Jordan. I just want to piggyback there. And I think just in general, the chemistry you're seeing develop between JVR, Frost, and Tippett is a really good sign because, I mean, you could look at the past handful of games before that line essentially got put together, and you could probably say the Flyers were basically a one-line team, maybe a 3-4 player type team on offense. So just seeing a line like that be put together and have some, success is a great sign just for the Flyers in the sense that, I mean, they do lack offense. It's no surprise to anybody. And obviously that's something that the team's consistently working on. And I think that's a game, I mean, where you kind of see the Flyers do a little better offensively than they typically would, right? As they're usually scoring about, 2 goals or just above 2 goals per game on average. So right now, I mean, that goes past their average. So that's a good thing just to see, a guy like Frost get some confidence, have that type of breakout game is great. And then another factor as well, it's kind of secondary from the results, which isn't what they're looking for. I mean, they want to get a win there. That's why I think John Tortorella probably starts Carter Hart instead of Sandstrom, as people were kind of calling for. But that would be Cam York's play. And that continues obviously into the Colorado game as well. But York just impressive after being called up, from the AHL, just great with the breakouts, creating offense, which I think is obviously the most important thing for this team, because I do believe that in these last handful of games, you see that it is close games. The structure is there defensively. They may have some mistakes and things like that. But typically they're in these games and they're all about, one goal or things get away from them in the third period. And I think that's a big thing to take away is the effort's still there for this team and the work ethic typically, despite the results not always being there in this last 18 game stretch where they've been 3-11 and 4, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a theme we've talked about quite a bit here is when it is a talent problem, you will see the team lose 3-2. You'll see them lose by 1 goal. We've seen that. We've been talking about that for, I don't know, 12 months already. It is a talent problem here. We can be honest with it, but I think, the nuance that I talk about is the roles, right? We have some roles that are actually well defined and aren't a huge problem, but we lack clearly. I mean, the injuries prove that we were kind of on the brink of all of this. And, even when we play a team like the Avs, right? They're missing key players, but they still have some really big roles that are assigned to star players. So they can kind of ride that out. Flyers don't have that luxury. And you look at a guy like Kevin Hayes, who's now been shifted over to a winger, it makes things interesting. I'm bringing back to you, Jordan. What do you think about what Frost has output within that game? Is that something that you think that he needs to do on a regular basis at this point to get a contract? Or do you think, if he just finishes the season with like 30 points on the year, it's enough to get re-signed? Like, what do you kind of see in your head there?
I believe he'll still be restricted at the end of the season. So the Flyers, obviously really have team control over this. And I don't think they're going to totally give up on him. But if they are looking to shake things up and maybe they look at Morgan as possibly trade bait, like that could be a decent trade chip. I'm not saying Morgan's going to get traded, but again, like we'll see where the Flyers go from here. And they could be at a point where they do need to kind of shake things up, and Morgan Frost will be a decent trade chip. He's a first round pick with scoring pedigree, and he's cheap. He's not on an expensive deal. So the Flyers, I think, are just trying to see what they have in terms of asset value, and I think they're going to be patient with them. They've been patient with them. They've let him, recover from injury. They let him go to the Lehigh Valley. They've let him go back and forth. And they're really giving him this full season to play, to not worry about going down the Lehigh. He's no longer waivers exempt, so he's very much a Flyer, an NHL player. As for what they're exactly looking for from a point total, I think they're just looking for him to be consistent and be a threat night in and night out. And he just hasn't done that at this level. There's games where he blends in and sometimes disappears. And then there's games where he'll put up 4 points and you're just like, wow, we see it.
Can I ask you a question there quick, Jordan? What do you think about that game? Kind of like what would you see as a defining characteristics between that game and the way he played and the other games, right? Where he obviously did not get the same results.
Yeah, I think he's just more active and confident. Like he looks like one of the best playmakers on the ice. And I think when he thinks like that and he gets 1 point or he gets one sequence where he's making things happen, his confidence goes through the roof. But if things don't go his way, maybe in the first period, suddenly you see him kind of dip and he doesn't play maybe the same way. He always talks about moving his legs and making sure he's not watching, because I think in junior hockey, he probably got away with just immense skill and not always moving his legs and using his body. I think he's learning more to do that on a consistent basis, but he still needs to do it night in and night out, shift after shift. No player is going to be perfect shift after shift, but you can at least try to be consistent in the way you play. I just haven't seen the consistency yet. I was really hoping he'd score a point last night. He didn't. He won the faceoff on the Cam York goal, so he did some good things. But you were really hoping he could string together consecutive games of points. No one's looking in to score 4 points a night. You're just looking at him to be at least active and consistent. Maybe create chances, and put up an assist or two or score a goal or two. Rather consistently. He just hasn't done that, and it's glaring because it's on a team that's asking him to produce. They're putting him in roles to produce. They know his role is offense, and he's just not doing it to the degree that he should be. But I think the Flyers will be patient with him. I don't think he's restricted, so I think he's very much still in the future. But you never know. You never know. And he's a nice asset, that's for sure.
I gotta say, and Vasili, I want to go to you after this, but I gotta say, I really appreciate that you just said that. Because I know what Bill Meltzer thinks. I talked to Bill Meltzer and my friend Chris Mayer, who's been on here quite a bit. Yet, Chris, there are supporters for Frost, but we say it on this podcast all the time. Like, people are like, "Oh, Noah Cates is a prospect. Frost is on his last." They're literally the same age. It's like, you have to consider, it doesn't matter the route that you saw them come in. It's like, he's still a prospect. He's still kind of a work in progress. Maybe he's not going to be your Claude Giroux of the future, but it doesn't mean he can't be a viable NHL asset. And I like that you said that. It's like, if he doesn't break out completely, he's out of here. It's like, really? Is that the case? I do agree. He could be that valuable trade chip as well, though.
And I will say this real quick. They're different players. They definitely are. But Scott Lawton was a guy that was picked in the same range as Morgan Frost. Late
Absolutely.
20s, first round pick. I think a lot of people thought offense. I think he even thought offense. It didn't really pan out that way in the NHL. He kind of had a roller coaster. He was with the Flyers. Then he spent a whole year in Lehigh.
Mm-hmm.
And then he ended up carving out of a role, and he understood what he could do. And that was kill penalties, be tough to play against, and do those little things. And now his game's starting to round into form. He's starting to produce a little more offensively, and he's very much a difference-making player, and that's a good thing. Morgan Frost might not be a 50, 60-point scorer, but could he play an important role in a team? I wouldn't rule that out. And I think Scott Lawton's a good case that it can take time. Sometimes you have to be patient. Give it some time, and remember that he's only 23.
Yeah, at 24, they had to protect him for expansion. I remember a lot of people were baffled by that. And it's like, I am not. Sorry, Vasili, go ahead. Did you have anything?
Yeah, no worries. Just to touch on Frost, I mean, you hit the nail on the head there, Jordan. I would say, right, and we say this all the time in this podcast, development is not a linear thing in the NHL. It's different for, each prospect, each player as they come along. And I think really something you got to take into consideration with Frost mainly is that that injury that he suffered really set him back, I believe. And I think technically, if you look at it, he's had some NHL experience in spot duty even last year, right? He started off in the AHL, got called up into a situation where the team isn't very good, so never really a full season. So it can be hard for a player to adjust like that when you're going up from Lehigh up back to the Flyers and so on, right? So I think this is really his first full crack. Okay, you're starting in the NHL, we want to see what you have. So I think people really need to take that into account, that he hasn't really had a lot of chances in top six roles as he's getting right now. So I'm kind of interested to see what he does the rest of the season. And it's encouraging that even though you don't see a point come out of the Colorado game, you still see that Tippett, JVR and Frost line still create some chances and look good and play well, right? So at least you don't have them going from, multi-point games for all three of them to then not even noticing them the next game. So I think that's a good sign. And hopefully you do see the consistency kind of come out as the season goes along, because I think that's really what is missing from his game is you see the flashes of skill, but then you say to yourself, you know what, I want more, and I want to see it happen on a more consistent and daily basis. But I think that's all about becoming a pro and kind of figuring out where he fits in the league, because I do think you're right in the sense, Jordan. I don't think he's going to be an 80, 90 point, 70 point guy at this point, but it might be more around like, 40 to 60 range, depending on where he tops out. So it's just more of a wait and see with Frost. And like you were saying, Yariv, even if it doesn't work out here, I think he still has the pedigree. And there's flashes of talent where you get a 4-point game in there where other GMs are going to see that and say, well, you know what, we wouldn't mind to trade for him. And sometimes those trades where it's a change of scenery for players, or you, let's say, trade Frost for another guy who's maybe a younger player that's having the same type of struggles on another team, can work out really well, right? So you can't discount both things potentially happening. I don't think the storybook is finished with Frost. There's a lot to go, I would say.
Yeah.
Yeah, well said. And so the Flyers actually come off another loss here. Yeah, as you were saying, Jordan, they lose another tough game to the Avs, who I didn't expect the Avs to lose this game, to be honest. I don't expect them to lose 2 games in a row to the Flyers. That would be a little I don't know.
Bizarre world.
Yeah, definitely a bizarre world. But there were some positives still to take out of the game. I mean, again, it's another one of those scenarios where you can just tell the Flyers are a little bit short on talent. And that's why they lose this game. Overall, they're not playing a complete mess, but you did touch on it earlier, Vasili, Cam York specifically. I mean, it's not surprising what he's doing. I think he showed flashes of this last season as well. But it is kind of like a reminder when you see Cole Caulfield like kind of out there killing it that, okay, Flyers didn't completely blow this draft or anything like that. Cam York is definitely kind of here. He's probably here to stay, is my guess. And the Flyers are going to have to adjust now. But what do you think about Cam York in general? Jordan, I'll go to you again first. What do you think about Cam York? What do you think about his, I guess, resurgence here and the fact of how Tortorella is treated it? And I've said this about Tortorella all the time. Like, people say Tortorella is the doghouse. I really don't see it. He kind of just calls it as it is. And if you change, you're right back out. Like, he's not sitting there holding a grudge. He's like, that's what I wanted to see. Great, you're in now. And you can see that with the ice time reflected. And obviously he's playing a lot. So, sure, what do you think about Cam York?
I agree, Yariv, about Tortorella too. I think he makes examples of guys that are in higher profiles. Like Cam York, I thought was a good case. I did not agree whatsoever with sending him down. And I think that was more just making an example of, I don't care if you're a first round pick and everyone's pinning you, projecting you to be in the lineup. Like, if you don't do what I think you should do, there are repercussions. And I think they did that. The Flyers did that with Kevin Hayes and Travis Konecny earlier in the year when they sat for the entire third period against the Sharks when they were only down 2-0. Like, here are their 2 best guys in terms of scoring. They're trying to come back. And Tortorella's like, nope, you know what? You didn't do a couple things I liked. You're going to sit, and we're going to show the entire team that if you don't play the right way, no one is free from sitting or being punished. So I think Tortorella will do that. He'll make examples of guys. And York, I think, was a really good case of sending him down to Lehigh. But I think he's looked great. If you think about it, in that loss to the Avalanche, the Flyers are getting shut out there until the final 3 minutes if Cam York doesn't make a play solely by himself. Like, he shimmies, he dekes the forward, and he gets a shot off, follows his own shot, scores. Like, that is, the Flyers don't even have a goal the entire game unless Cam York makes that play. So that was real impressive because it's a team that is desperate for offense, desperate for guys to make things happen. And he kind of answered the bell. Tortorella earlier in the year said, I want to see him play his game. I want to see him push the envelope. I don't want to see him just be, D-to-D pass, get it up. Like, he wants to see him show his strengths. And that's Cam York right there, showing his strengths of making things happen with his skill and his ability. So I think, I very much think he's going to be here to stay unless he plays against New Jersey and doesn't look right. But I think right now he's making a case to stay here. And given where the season is, the team is 9-14-7. I think it's a year where you want to play your kids and see what you have. I don't see why there's any reason why, maybe some older veterans on D should be playing over young prospects that look like they belong here and they can help. So I think the Flyers, if there's one one good problem is they have some depth on defense. They'll have some decisions when Tony DeAngelo gets back and they have, solid vets like Nick Sealer and Justin Braun who might have to, be some healthy scratches, and it's not the worst thing in the world. So Cam York looks good, and I think he's one of the more promising aspects to the organization right now. And he's a very important guy to Chuck Fletcher and Brent Flair. He's their first ever draft pick. So, and they passed up on Cole Caulfield to get him. So, and a very important player for this regime and for the organization.
Yeah, you ain't kidding. 100% agree with that statement. Silly, sorry, you want to add?
Yeah, sure. Just for York, just to kind of jump off, it just shows that Tortorella, like you were saying, Yariv, isn't going to hold a grudge. Like if he sees things that you like, he's going to play you. Case in point, York leads the defenseman in ice time last night with 21 minutes and 35 seconds. And that's impressive, right? When you have guys on this defense like a Sanheim, like a Provorov, who typically log over 20 minutes a night, which they both did do. But seeing a guy like York, I mean, take that over from them is impressive, and it obviously just speaks to the way that Tortorella thinks that he's playing. I just think one of the most impressive parts of his game is just his ability to break the puck out. I think the Flyers, even last season and at points this season, they've kind of struggled in that area, especially when you remove a guy like a D'Angelo from the lineup, who's probably their greatest asset in doing that, aside from a guy like a York and a Sanheim. So then, you see York kind of make those shimmy plays up the wall and really do his own one-man zone exits a lot, which I noticed last game against Colorado. There's a couple times where he kind of beats a couple oncoming forecheckers and then pushes it up the ice and then starts to play. So I think that's a great thing to see. And just in general, I mean, it should be about kind of finding out what he can do at this level and where he needs to improve, right? Obviously, he's tearing up the AHL level previously, so why not kind of see what he can do at this level and then work on, strengths that he has at this level and what they can do to kind of improve those even more. I think Tortorella is a great coach for things like that, just in terms of development. We've obviously seen that, people didn't agree in certain senses with the send down at the beginning of the year, but it looks like, I mean, it pays off in a sense because he's coming up and playing so well, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And let's you guys touched on it already, but Tony DeAngelo has been out for a little bit. A guy like York is playing some of DeAngelo's minutes there. But I do expect DeAngelo back in the roster. You look at the team's inability to produce offense. At least maybe you can produce a little bit more from the back end, right? So you're not going to keep Tony DeAngelo out of the lineup. I think obviously he had some family issues, maybe a little bit banged up. Maybe it was just kind of a call in general. Maybe they knew something was coming to. I don't know. I don't want to speculate too much, but I don't think you go from playing a guy 27 minutes a night to healthy scratching him for no reason. It just logically doesn't make a lot of sense to me. But I think it's an opportunity now. I think there's going to be probably some lineup changes there on that D. Jordan, I'll go to you first. Where do you think that DeAngelo plays? Like, how do you see the kind of pairings working out against New Jersey?
I think they're going to try to get him back up to the top pair with Provorov. I think they want some consistency there. Mm-hmm. And I think Ristolainen's done okay there, but maybe go back to what was kind of working, which I thought DeAngelo and Provorov got off to a nice start. And I also think Ristolainen and Sanheim have some previous chemistry as well. And then you have some good balance, I think, of offense throughout all three pairs if Cam York stays in the lineup. You have offense at the top, you have Sanheim producing offense on the second pair, and you have York, a real good offensive threat on the third pair. So that's where I think it'll probably play out. John Tortorella likes Tony DeAngelo. He's praised him ever since the offseason. DeAngelo's going to play. I think the healthy scratch was the one-time thing, the first game of this road trip. I think he'll be back in there when he can, whenever he's back from dealing with the family matter. And I think you can never really have too many puck movers, too many guys that can create offense, especially on a team that doesn't have it a ton up front. So I think they're going to get DeAngelo in there and make sure York stays in as long as he shows he can keep playing at this level consistently. So Flyers should have some more offense from their back end, and that's where I think everything should be orchestrated, is from the back end and get the puck to the forwards and try to just get the puck in the net a little bit more because they're a goal away. Like, they're a goal or two away from winning some of these games. And, 7 losses after regulation, a lot of one goal losses. So they need offense, and I think they're going to get it with DeAngelo's return.
Yeah, and I love what you said there. And honestly, wouldn't Couturier and Atkinson probably give you at least half a goal a game? So, for sure. And I like what you said there with the pairings. That's like what was penciled in to start the season. I do agree that they should go to that. If they don't go to that, I can see them maybe just putting D'Angelo in for Braun as like a temporary type of solution. But I like what you said. I agree. I think they showed great flashes at the beginning of the season with Provorov and D'Angelo. I think you can go back, try if since Ristolainen's playing better, put him with Sanheim, to get York on the third pair and give him high power play minutes and balance out his minutes that way, right? And play him either with Braun or Sealer. And I think that's pretty balanced D, and that's how the Flyers can at least attack back end out. Yeah. Vasili, you want to add?
Yeah, just to speak to your point, I thought it was hilarious, Yariv, just about Couturier and Atkinson. The Flyers are one actually in 11 in games tied after the second period. So they've been tied this season out of that many games, like 12 times. So it just shows, right? Like, add a couple guys in, you never know where they're going to be. Just in terms of the defensive pairings as well, I mean, I think Jordan kind of hit the nail on the head with that. I definitely see Provorov, D'Angelo getting put back together just due to the success that they've had. And obviously, if you consider D'Angelo was a little bit banged up, I don't think they're going to discount that. And I mean, probably give them another chance just to see what they can do there. I know they were trying Sanheim and York a little bit together, so I'm interested to see if maybe they'll go with that. You have two really good puck movers. I just do know that York is pretty inexperienced at this point. I mean, he's only really had a handful of NHL games, maybe upwards close to 50, so they might not want to keep him on his offside, so they might just go ahead and get him back to the third pair, playing on the left side. So it'll be interesting, but probably should be kind of what we expected, I think, at the beginning of the year, guys, where you get a Provorov, D'Angelo, Sanheim, Ristolainen, and then a York and Sealer, and then maybe you see Braun rotate in as well potentially, because I'm sure they're not going to keep him out for too long either. So,
yeah, absolutely. So, and let's talk about another kind of. We mentioned it earlier a little bit with Hayes now being on the left side. Are we assuming that he's just a winger from here on out as a Flyer in general? You look at where JVR is with his contract; he's probably on his way out. And now you kind of slide a different, big left winger kind of into that equation. I guess that's how you kind of allocate that money and say, well, at least our top left wing, or at least, the top six has a top six left winger there. And, we do have a huge gap there with Sean Couturier and the question marks around that. Some of that will come out as the season goes on. But how do we kind of feel about Hayes just being a winger now? I think it puts him in a weird place, in a weird position with the future of this team. I'll be honest. Jordan, I'll go to you first there.
Yeah, it's a great question. I don't know. I feel like it's probably a little more temporary. I think at the end of the day, they're going to want Hayes in that 6'5" frame down the middle of the ice, doing what they always thought he would do when they first got here. But Chuck Fletcher was honest, at the start of this month. He said, when we got Kevin Hayes, we didn't think he was an elite defensive player. Like, we knew that. He said they were aware of that when they got him. They knew he was more offensive minded than he was defensive minded. So in saying that, I think John Tortorella wants him to be a little more structured and a little more reliable defensively in certain D zone coverages. And they moved him to the wing because of that, because they thought they could trust a guy like Noah Cates or Lucas Sedlak down the middle a little bit more. But I think that could be temporary, because perhaps they get to a spot where they need centers. Like, a center is like a premium position. You're probably going to need them throughout the year. And Kevin Hayes is a natural centerman. So I think eventually he'll get his way back there, and Tortorella will push him to do certain things that maybe he hasn't done in the past defensively. I think the good thing is he can play a little bit of both. He's played a little bit of winger in the past. He's got the offensive ability to play winger. But I think deep down, though, they want him at center, and they want his strengths down the middle of the ice, because it's such an important position, and he's got all the ingredients really to be a really solid 200-foot center that's going to give you offense, and you can trust him defensively. So I think with time, we'll see him at center. I don't think it's the biggest storyline that he's at wing. As long as he's playing and he's out there and he's doing some of the things that he regularly would, I don't think it's the biggest storyline in the world. I do think he'll make his way back to center. I'm curious as to what you guys think.
Yeah, Vasily, I'll let you.
So for Hayes, it's definitely interesting just because he's a left-handed shot, so you put him on the wing there, and he can come down and kind of make a lot of plays with his vision. I mean, that's typically where he is making a lot of his plays anyway, is from the board. Usually he isn't a guy that is facilitating from the middle that much. Usually kind of protects the puck with that big frame to the outside, tries to make a play into the slot from that area. So I think in that sense, the move to wing is actually great for him, right? Because you take away some of those defensive responsibilities from his plate, and it opens him up to be more offensive minded. And was his team ultimately lacked the most is offense. So that's kind of, I think, the method to the madness behind Tortorella's move there and kind of getting him to go to wing. But in terms of him getting back to center, I think it just all depends on the non-negotiables that John Tortorella really looks for in his centers and is looking for in that position defensively, right? Like the down low coverage and just not being able to sometimes pick up loose wingers in front of the net that leads to goals. That's stuff that Tortorella hates, and pretty much that any coach isn't going to like to see from a center who's kind of supposed to be marking those players in his own end like that. So I think until you see an improvement there, and whether it's going to be like you have Hayes, pick up center in a couple of scrimmages in practice, or he just sees it happen on the wing in terms of his coverages, I don't think we'll see him get back until kind of Hayes, proves to Tortorella that he can handle those coverages. But I do ultimately think that Fletcher and Tortorella would like him at center. I just don't know if his defensive play warrants that at the moment. What do you think, Yariv?
Yeah, I think they will try him again at center. I think we'll see more shifts. He's being exposed more, and I think everybody is, because Sean Couturier is not in this lineup.
Yeah, exactly.
I think in the beginning of the season, everybody reacted so harshly to Couturier being injured because we all knew what was going to happen, is that this is not the same team without him. I mean, if you think back to the Flyers not having Voracek and Giroux, even with Wayne Simmons here, I mean, again, Atkinson and Couturier have been out all year. Like, these are humongous, immense losses. And I think that a lot more goes on Kevin Hayes, so a lot more scrutiny probably too. I think he probably, some of his defensive woes were masked behind Couturier being here and playing some of those minutes, the matchups being different. But I don't think it's a great sign that that they took it away from him. But like I said before, I don't think that Torts is going to put him in a position where he can't get out of that.
Yeah,
I think
exactly.
to look at a guy who's 6'5", has all the tools, and has played center, you're not going to be like, I'm never going to try him again.
I think Yariv just wants to see certain things within his game defensively before he gives him that responsibility back, and then until he sees it, in a sense, right? And then to your point as well, just to jump off, I think the hard thing for him at center this season is, think about it, he's usually not playing top lines on an every night basis. So then when you have to defend against that, and that's typically not what he's used to, then you kind of see the defensive shortcomings, right? And that's not any fault of him, because in my opinion, this has been one of his best seasons. So
yeah, offensively for sure. And and that's why I bring up the question marks of trades and all that, because again, if he's having high offensive output, I gotta consider that. It also speaks to how good Noah Cates is defensively, quite frankly, that they can do that. But it does make me think overall, how has Tortorella looked as a coach, right? Like all of these shifts that he's making, I want to see him do more. He's kind of not in a great position, right? Like he came in expecting to have certain roster players here. No doubt about it that Sean Couturier was part of the sell of this team. This is one of the best defensive players in Flyers history, in the league, easily an elite player. I just heard I think it might have been on your podcast, Jordan, where I think his statistical output was like 9 points in 5 games in the playoffs in his last series or something like that, against the Capitals. I just heard that recently, but again, it's easy to forget the high level impact on these guys. But again, without the losing, with the pushing in the right position, and the way that a lot of people expected the results to happen overnight. And what I was saying to Vasili last time is, like, a lot of people don't have the gumption to kind of go through this. It's incredibly uncomfortable to watch him move guys and bench guys and do all that. And you're like, he's going to lose them. They're going to hate him. But it's like, this is going to take a lot longer than 30 games in the season. It's going to take at least one whole season to go through this, to really change something. I'll go to you first, Jordan. What do you think about, because again, let's say he's 40% through what he's doing this year, right? Or maybe even less. But what do you think so far about what you've seen from Tortorella? You don't have to grade it, but like positives, negatives.
No, I think overall, I think it's mostly positive, because one, you have a guy that's really wants to be here and wants to be in this spot, and this spot's not pretty. There's not a ton of there's not a ton of pros to it. There's a ton of cons to the situation, and he's kind of taking it on. And I think that's a positive. You have a coach that's been around and he's used to building up teams from the ground up, and he wants to do it here despite the circumstances. And secondly, if you told me before the season that the Flyers wouldn't have Cam Atkinson or Sean Couturier yet, I probably would have predicted they'd be in worse of a spot than they are now. And the spot's not pretty. I mean, what, they've lost 21 games, won 9. I really thought if you told me they wouldn't have Atkinson or Couturier, I really think they would have been worse than this. So I got to give Tortorella credit. I think the overall goal, when they didn't go out and get Johnny Gaudreau and they didn't add much offense in the offseason, the overall goal was first, cut down on the goals against. Get the team at least playing structurally to the point where you're in games and you're not giving up 5 to 6 goals and things aren't breaking down in front of you. That was the main goal. And to their credit, they have cut down on their goals against. Over the previous 2 seasons combined, they were giving up the most goals in hockey along with the Devils per game. I think it was like 3.56. Their goals against are definitely down. It's gone up a little bit with injuries and stuff, but for the most part, I feel like Tortorella has gotten that kind of hammered home of playing the right way, understanding defense and coverage in their own zone, giving Carter Hart a chance to stop the puck. So I think that's been a primary goal, and they've done a decent job at it. It's just trying to get offense out of guys where there's a major talent deficiency here. It's just what it is. They don't have a ton of talent. The talent gap is clear when they're playing other teams. But can you keep yourself in games defensively? And for the most part, I think they've done that. So I think Tortorella has done a pretty good job, and I think you can't keep firing coaches. You just can't. Like, if Alain Vigneault wasn't working, and then you get a guy like John Tortorella in here, and people are, not giving him time, like, you have to be patient and let him kind of work with what he has, and then see if his GM helps him, and if some young guys take major strides. Like, I think they're banking on Cam York and Tyson Forrester and guys like maybe Elliot Denoyer and some other D prospects that they could become players quickly and become kind of cornerstones to what they want to do. But it could take time. And Tortorella's, been honest about that. And I think it's a good thing that the coach understands the big picture and how long it could take. But for me, I think they have the right coach right now. I don't think there's anyone else in my mind that I'm like, they could use that guy instead of Torts. I think he's been fine. It's going to require patience.
Can I ask you real quick before I let Vasili chime in? Do you think, how do you feel about the notion that this is the right coach because it makes him better, but he shouldn't be here because he doesn't have the roster for that, and we really should be tanking, not like building the culture now. We have to really let it collapse and then build it up. Do you agree with that thought process at all?
No, I think he's very good for building it up from the ground up. Like, to me, the Flyers bottomed out last year. Like, perhaps they get worse this year. It's not outside the realm of possibility in terms of where they finished in the standings and points. But I mean, last year they were 13, 12, and 5 at this point. So they were better, but then they fell off the map. Like, they fell off a cliff. They lost 13 straight. They had 2 other 6-game skids. So they got significantly worse. I do think we'll see some signs of improvement, and I think they bottomed out. Like, I really very much do see them kind of building from the ground up. I think they have more pieces than some people give them credit for. Like, I think there are some foundation pieces that you can put your finger on and say, hey, that's a good young player, and I think he's here to stay. So I really don't think you really have to knock it down anymore. I do think the trade deadline in March will be really telling, because where do the Flyers see themselves? Do they see themselves completely out of it? Or do they think they need to restart completely in terms of trading players in their late 20s, early 30s with a lot of term and money to totally restart? Or do they think some of these guys can be pieces to a team that contends maybe next year or the year after that? Like, where will Kevin Hayes be in his game compared to where the Flyers are in the grand scheme? So I think that will all be fascinating to see how management sees it, if they see some of these core guys as players that can be here when they win again, or if they think if they don't see it aligning, the right way. So we'll see. It'll be fascinating to see, especially as March gets closer.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, it's always definitely fascinating with the trade deadline. So that's a real interest of mine as well, Jordan. And I think definitely with Tortorella, he's probably most definitely the right coach for the job, just in the sense that the Flyers culture and just how things were last season was in a bad way. And when you let that spiral to a certain extent, it's really hard to put it back on the map. So I think it was a good hire from the perspective that, okay, we need to correct this now, because letting it go any further, it's going to be even harder to dig ourselves out of that hole. And typically, people aren't aware, but Tortorella in his first season usually does not make the playoffs with most teams. Like under the Rangers, he did not make the playoffs. Under Columbus, he did not make the playoffs. So this is not a new thing. Usually he comes in, he looks and sees what's there, what he has to work with, and then what he can kind of evaluate moving forward and use in future years. So I think that's definitely a part of it. And I think the real difference with Tortorella is just the ethic and work ethics that you're seeing. I mean, from the team on the ice on a nightly basis, that kind of makes it different than last year. And that's just in the sense of, I mean, how many times last year would you see them get blown out or lose these games in a fashion that was kind of embarrassing, where the team's not working hard? Whereas this season, I mean, you see all the players are bought in, they're working hard. I mean, they might not have the talent, as we're saying, to score these goals to win these types of games, but they're in the games until it kind of gets away from them. So in that sense, I think Tortorella is, perfect for this type of group, because he's a type of guy that demands that respect. Whereas I don't know if you have a different type of coach, if things kind of get off the rails at some point, if the losing continues. Whereas I think Tortorella has so much respect in that room. I don't think players are going to be, willing to battle with him there on that. So I think you're going to see them, continuing to bring that effort and those habits. And what it is really is it's a cyclical thing that he's trying to do, right? And it's in anything. When you develop habits as a player, you continue to do that in games. Let's say when you're tired, when things aren't going right for you, that habit comes out of you. And that's what Tortorella is kind of trying to put into place with this team, is with their defensive structure, that, okay, you're tired, you're out on the ice on a shift, for 2-3 minutes. I want you to be able to make the right decisions and do the right things that are going to lead and help and make sure that our goal differential stays low and that we're not giving up tons of goals a game. I really think that was something that was lacking in their game last season, where you'd see, veteran players or certain players make mistakes that you typically wouldn't see. So I think Tortorella just kind of getting him in here this year is about correcting that, and he's done that to that extent. And I'm interested to kind of see where it goes from here with some of the younger guys, because I think we're seeing guys turn a page, such as Morgan Frost, Owen Tippett, Cam York, right? So we'll see kind of where they go under his tutelage.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead, Jordan, please.
I want to say it's a great point about not making the playoffs in year one. I know in Tampa, first year, very similar to this year, he did not have a captain. He took the captaincy away from Vinny LeCavalier. He went with 3 alternates. They had a real kind of like growing pains type of year where they got better, but I think they had like 27 wins. By year 3, they won the Stanley Cup. And I'm not saying that's what's going to happen here with the Flyers, but
you never know. Exactly.
Right. It can change with one off season where you feel like you took strides and then you add a couple pieces. You have a couple young players take on bigger roles, and then suddenly it turns. Like I've seen it turn so quick in this game.
100%.
Exactly. The thing is, too, they have the main piece, I think, that is crucial for that, and that's Carter Hart. Yeah. Whereas if you don't have the goalie, then it's an even tougher task. But now you have the goalie, you have some defensemen. Once you see it start to turn a little bit, then you never know what can happen. I think that's a great point to bring up, Jordan.
Yeah, I talked to Scott Lawton the other day, about a week or so ago, and about how he wanted to be a part of something here. And, I asked about his frustration with the words rebuild and retool. And he says, hey, I feel like we can, I can be a part of something where we build something here. And I said, I'm like, you've seen it turn quick in this game. And he's like, yeah. And he was like, we have the goalie for it. That was the first thing he said, was we have the goalie for it.
Love that.
I said, that's a good point. It's 24-year-old that's very much established and probably only getting better at the most important position.
He's just hitting his prime, in my opinion.
Yep. So we'll see. It can turn quick. I do think this is a major transitional season.
Yeah.
I think you had the right coach to exactly what you guys said. Start a culture, get like a foundation underneath you, and he's very good at doing that. He's done that his whole career. So I don't think there's anyone else I would really think of as like, do they have is there a better coach for more future-oriented things? I think Tortorella is very much a big picture, future-oriented coach.
Yeah, no, I think well said on both of your parts. I think it definitely sums up where I'm at with it. This has gone pretty much. I mean, the record's not exactly what I expected. I thought they'd be closer to 500. I did not expect the injuries, though. That was all before the injuries. Without the injuries, I don't see them as a playoff team. Without Couturier, I don't see them as a playoff team. I just don't. I don't see it. I don't see you competing without a number 1 center. Like, I love Noah Cates. I love Frost. I love their potential. again, they're just not there. They can't compete against the best players in the world every night. They just can't do it. In fact, most of the players on our team can't do that. So losing him is even that much more impactful. But I do think what you guys are saying, he's coming here and doing exactly that. That's what we need. We need the chaos to stop. We need to be established as some kind of hardworking team that has attention to detail. We get the most out of every player here, so players want to play here and recognize that, so they come here and they thrive. I do see signs of that. A lot of people freak out when somebody struggles. You see Toro's always putting them back in the mix. Everybody's getting worked in. It's not a joke to him. Like, he's not. He said it. I think people think he's kidding. But he's always talking about that. I think it will expose a lot of things we need going into next year. I think this is an incredibly important year. And I think he's doing everything he needs to do to get us ready. I don't know the relationship between him and Chuck Fletcher. I'm not going to pretend like I know the relationship between the two of them. But here's my question, and Jordan, I'll go to you. Is Chuck Fletcher at this point the right man for the job? Because and I don't mean for the job currently, I think he is an adequate, hockey person. Like, I don't think he's the worst GM ever. I don't think every move he made is a mistake. But I have yet to see the type of moves that are needed to turn this around quickly. And I haven't seen kind of like the right plan put forward. And like I said, we're in unknown territory. We're in a weird place. And right now the Flyers don't really know where they're going as a team. I don't know exactly what's going to happen, but do we feel like Chuck Fletcher is the man to move forward? I personally, I think he's gone beyond my comfort zone. I'm not used to a GM getting this much slack. I always like to, kind of give people like a little bit extra because he's done a few things that I like, but it's been hard for me to kind of buy into his plan because I don't see it. I don't agree with a lot of the moves he's made. While some of them have been good in isolation, I do think that this team has gotten worse under his watch. Whether he's responsible for all of it, I don't think so. But it's still his job, and I don't know if I've seen enough to make me think that he's the guy who can turn this around in a reasonable amount of time. Jordan, I'll go to you first.
Yeah, it'll be interesting how, it's tough to get a read on exactly where they think things are because they haven't been totally transparent about the direction. I think that's where fans get frustrated. Is like they heard aggressive retool last January. And I think they thought that would be, hey, make a couple moves, not totally restart, but retool and do it aggressively and be ready to go the next season. And then they had a very quiet off season where they didn't make a big splash, and it looks like they took a bigger step backward. So I think a little more transparency on the direction could probably really help his case. But I do believe he's very well liked within the organization because he delegates. He's benevolent in the way he goes about things. He listens to people. And I think that goes a long way. As long as you're, running the show, but also using the people around you, I think you're going to be well liked and people will trust you and understand through the good and the bad. You can get a longer leash. To me, in order for him to be fired or allow a move to be made, someone would have to go to Dave Scott and say, we think we need change. And that would probably come from, I'm assuming, the senior advisors that surround Chuck Fletcher, the Dean Lombardis, the Paul Holmgrens, the Bob Clarks, the Danny Briers, even. But I think Chuck is well liked. I think he's a smart guy. He went to Harvard. He's had a track record of getting teams to the playoffs. I don't think he gets enough credit for what he did in Minnesota. His Wild teams were pretty good. They ran into the Blackhawks in a number of years. He got those teams to the playoffs, I believe, 4, 5, 6 straight years. But I think the big thing is just understanding where they view this and how competitive do they think they can get in terms of like how quickly can they do it. But I wouldn't put it past Chuck Fletcher to be able to get this team back to contending again. I thought he did some good things at the start of his tenure. I mean, the biggest reason they won a playoff series for the first time since like 2011-12 was because of Chuck Fletcher and what he did. Unfortunately, COVID threw a major wrench in everything, and that hurt him. And I really thought a costly offseason was the one before the shortened year. I just felt like it was such a quiet offseason where he had a chance to replace Matt Niskanen and potentially just supplement what they had. They had a really good team in 2019-20. They fell 1 win shy of the Eastern Conference Final in the bubble. And I just thought the offseason was incredibly quiet. The biggest thing they did was they got Eric Gustafson, and I just thought it set them back. And it had a year where they were really stagnant. They missed the playoffs, and I just felt like that was a damaging year for Chuck Fletcher and for what the Flyers' direction. It hasn't been the same since then. But now he's got to get it back on track. Uh, and I definitely think his seat is probably getting warm because general managers don't typically go through multiple coaching hires, and he's had two now. So, you got to make sure this one works and they start contending. The ownership wants to, they ultimately want to win. They don't want it to take forever. So we'll see how quickly it goes. But I think they vowed to be more competitive this year, and they should be. And if they're not, and they take a step back from what they went through last year, could be really telling for I think Chuck Fletcher and his job security. Because as you mentioned, Yariv, not a lot of GMs go through these 3 double-digit skids and survive it. Eventually, how many times can you fire a head coach? How many players can you trade that were core guys for years? Eventually, it goes to the top where the next change happens. So I think the pressure's on for Chuck Fletcher. He did some good things, but now he's got to get it back on track and really put butts back in seats again.
Yeah, absolutely. And it hasn't gone in that direction for him so far. Vasili, what do you think?
Yeah, it's fascinating with Fletcher. I think it's really going to be a business case study on kind of how things go with the Flyers here with him. Just because a lot of the times, I mean, we've discussed it before, it's in terms of what happens in an organization, it's top down. So when at a certain point is it, on him? And I mean, if you're going to be an organization that is preaching accountability and all of these things within your culture, it has to start at the top in certain senses, right? So I think that's going to be interesting for me to see, just because, I mean, and this is a stat from our own Jamie Baskow, who is always killing it on Twitter. Chuck Fletcher is actually 126, 129, and 39 in 294 games as the Flyers general manager so far. So he does not have a winning record. It's close to 500 essentially. I'm sure that's probably not what the Flyers are ultimately looking for. I mean, things have come and gone his way. I think there's honestly a lot of unfortunate circumstances that have kind of not really been under his control in terms of injuries, COVID, what's happened. So you cannot discount that, because I do think that there's certain areas where he's done a good job. And for me, that's mainly with the drafting. So far, I do like a lot of the draft picks that him and Brent Flair have kind of gone through. And if you look back in their track record, as you were kind of alluding to in Minnesota, a lot of the players right now that are on this Minnesota Wild team that are pretty good NHL players and contributors are Chuck Fletcher and Brent Flair draft picks. So that's something you got to take into account with this current crop that the Flyers kind of have coming up. And you're not really going to know how they pan out for probably the next 3-4 seasons, because they're still really young players. So you might be finding out, similar in a sense to Minnesota, potentially after the fact, where Fletcher's gone, that some of his players are being contributors, and that's all good and well. I just think with him, and what potentially is going to lead to his demise, is just the lack of creativity in a lot of the moves that he's making. I think this past offseason, we've talked about it a ton, Yariv. You have a team lacking center depth. You could go out and sign a center, potentially like a Dylan Strome, or other options for not too much money on the salary cap, and then potentially help yourself out. So I just think those types of moves that you're seeing that he has the opportunity to make but does not, that might be kind of where the Flyers are thinking, we need to go into a direction where we have more of a fresh perspective in terms of where the game's at right now in the NHL and what we need to win. So I wouldn't be surprised if what we've heard in the past, because he is well liked amongst those senior advisors, as you said. So I wouldn't be surprised if we see him kind of get bumped up to president, and then you have somebody else kind of take his place, which is, obviously the rumored Daniel Briere. It's hard to know, exactly what's going to happen. It's all really speculation from us, but there's a lot of moving parts. So I'm definitely interested in the next couple of months just to see how it unfolds.
And the what's unfortunate is the players that he's invested in, they haven't worked out in his favor, right? Ryan Ellis blew up in his face. Even you can make a case with Hayes, some serious injuries in between, and now not being able to play center. It's like every one of his moves kind of has that. Niskanen dropped early on him. Braun's been all right? But he's had some. D'Angelo had to, I would say paid a heavy cost to bring him in, but all of his moves kind of have a little bit of a caveat. I think his back is up against the wall. I said at the beginning of the season, I think he had to make the playoffs to keep his job. I don't know if that's the case. I'm just guessing. I don't think he's the worst GM ever. I think he's just again, some bad luck on top of what's happened. I just don't know what happened. Maybe he does get promoted. Maybe they don't do anything and they just roll with it. But I will say we'll probably know by the draft, or at least leading up to the draft, who's going to be running this team. Probably at least for next season, we'll know beforehand. So let's talk about this as we wrap up here. We'll do our last topic. As we go towards the trade deadline, as I just mentioned, the Flyers have to be looking at the draft to some degree at this point. I mean, there's a generational draft coming up, and they do have some players that maybe could be on the move. Some players of note, JVR, obviously in his last year of his deal, having a kind of a career year. Justin Braun, always available to trade. D'Angelo's might be available as well. I know it'd be quick in, quick out, but you have to look at the long term, just the numbers you can get rid of. Risto's got to be thrown out there. Obviously McEwen, some of the other guys. Jordan, I'll go to you first. Do you suspect that the Flyers will try to move out any names, any surprise names do you think will be thrown? I think Hayes is a surprise that I threw out there, but again, I just look at his value as far as a point producer. Can you get a first round pick in this ridiculous draft for him? Then you can start wheeling and dealing a little bit and freeing up cap space, see what you can do in the offseason, but maybe it's a little bit fantasy. But Jordan, what do you think?
No, it's a great question. I think it's the $1 million question. And I think there's still a lot of time to go. Obviously, the trade deadline is in March, but it's something to really keep an eye on as it gets closer. The Flyers are going to have some important meetings in-house between their pro scouts, management, and their coaching staff, and really, obviously, ownership, too, of where do we think this is? Do we feel like we're an off-season away from potentially contending for a playoff spot, or do we feel like we need to take a step back by freeing up cap space, eliminating some bigger deals, and getting assets in terms of picks and cap space. Cap space a bit, it's a big commodity now in today's NHL. So to me, I guess I think the most obvious one would probably be a James Van Riemsdyk. He's a pending unrestricted free agent. I don't believe the Flyers would re-sign him. And a really good player. I think JVR is very valuable. He's a proven guy. He's played in the playoffs. He can help you. He could help a contending team on its power play. He's a real pro. So he would be really good in terms of jumping into a locker room and being a good teammate, a good pro who goes about it the right way. And the Flyers would probably have to eat some money on his deal. But yeah, I think the Flyers have some chips that they'll have to think long and hard about in terms of, do they want to move them? Or do they think they can be a part of something next year or the year after? JVR, though, is the one that comes to mind because he would be a rental. He would be a UFA. The Flyers would likely not re-sign him. And so you might as well get something for him. And that would be my guess. So I'm saying James Van Riemsdyk. As for Kevin Hayes and Ristolainen, I'm not sure the Flyers are ready to part ways with those guys. I think they very much think they could be a part of what's going on here. I mean, Ristolainen's 28, and I think they believe he can still grow and be a little bit better. Kevin Hayes is a point-per-game guy pretty much right now, and he's only 30. I mean, these guys can still remain good players. Do you really want to trade them and really take an even larger step back? I'm still a believer that Chuck Fletcher and many people in house feel like some of these guys, are not on the tail end of their career. They're still good players making some good money, but can still be a part of something if the Flyers feel they can, start competing next year and the year after that. So long story short, I'll say James Van Riemsdyk just because of where his contract is.
Fair enough.
Yeah, definitely. And I think you brought up a great point, Jordan. That's kind of the thing I want to jump off of, and is really the defining factor is, where is the team kind of going to go from here? And I think that's going to really be the major key into what you see them do at the deadline, right? If they're thinking, okay, we need to step back, lose salary, and really try to build this thing through the draft for the next couple of seasons, then you're probably going to see irons in the fire trying to move out bigger contracts. Because obviously, I mean, even if you're an established veteran in this league, NHL GMs try to do good by their players in the sense that they don't want guys to, be a part of a long-going rebuild all the time. So they might do them a favor, kind of send them out if possible, things like that. I would say probably the likeliest to get traded, obviously, is, names that anybody would throw out at this point, probably JVR, Justin Braun as well. And then even, a host of bottom six depth that they have, probably, because I'm assuming they're going to want to get younger guys in as the year goes along. So probably like a Patrick Brown, maybe a Lucas Sedlak. I think all those guys could be nice, like depth deadline additions. But you know what? If we're looking at the bigger guys, I think it really depends, like you were saying, on what the viewpoint is for them and what they think long term. If we do see a lot of the bigger names moved, I'm leaning towards it being probably summer moves, just because a lot easier for other teams to kind of look at their budget into next year and think about salary cap. How are they going to fit in a guy like a Hayes who, let's say, makes a 7 million, or a Ristolainen who makes 5.5, or really, anybody else on the roster if they do decide to go like a scorched earth full rebuild that has some money and term attached. Typically, you don't see that traded at the deadline. Usually, it's guys that probably are on expiring contracts, or if anything, expire next year. So it's kind of like you get them for this year and next year. So it's like a double rental if you're like a contender, right? So it'll be interesting. I think there's going to be probably a lot of guys that we see moved along from at the deadline, and I'm sure there'll be a surprise or two. There always is, right?
Yeah. And one injury we didn't talk about at all is Bobby Brink, who goes completely under the radar. But you talk about where this team is with the power play and playmaking, the fact that they're already missing. Like, this is a pure offensive guy. Also, Chuck Fletcher's, obviously big draft right after York, when he was kind of the makeup for not taking Cole Caulfield a little bit.
Yeah, exactly.
The guy just can't. I mean, Fletcher's had no luck. Luck is when opportunity meets preparation, but still, he's had some really bad luck. I think he can respond better to that luck. Again, there's always a road to redemption, but he's got a lot to prove, I would say. And if he's gonna continue being the GM of this team, he's got to make moves where we walk away as fans proud of that move. It hasn't happened enough, and I think even if you can get one of them done, like, it's enough to buy yourself. Like, not that Torts can get credit for, not that the draft gets credit for, because nobody's going to notice that at first. Like, a trade where the Flyers clearly got something that the fans covet, right? Like, that's why Gaudreau was so tempting for everybody. Everybody loves Gaudreau.
Yeah.
Right? He's one of the best offensive players in the league. Nobody's going to deny that. It needs to be an obvious win for this team. He's got to get it. If it's as lucky as winning first overall, so be it.
Yeah.
But that's the type of thing he needs right now. It's something everybody can buy in. And I think Cutter Gauthier is part of that. And when he makes his way over here, I think a lot of people will be like 100%, we're all in on this guy. Fletcher brought him over and he'll get credit for that. But he needs more, especially to turn us around from where we're at right now.
Yeah, that's the one thing that the regime can probably say is that, hey, we haven't seen our draft classes yet really take the step yet. Like, let's see, perhaps they're really bullish on what they drafted in terms of York, Forrester, Brink, Cutter Gauthier. Obviously Samo Tuamala is pretty much a big project, but that draft, he was a second round pick. He was their top pick because they traded it. So perhaps they can say that, hey, we really think our draft classes are getting pretty close here to making a difference, and that could be something they can probably talk about and say, let's see how this plays out. But I really thought Fletcher was going to have a pretty big summer this past one, and he didn't. Right. But I think that, as Vasili said, I think this upcoming summer will be huge because that's really where I think the bigger deals can come with, in terms of moving money, moving players, more hockey trades. Whereas, at that trade deadline, it's going to be a very interesting trade deadline, but you might see more guys on expiring deals moved for picks, and that's about it.
Yeah, well said. Yeah. All right, let's wrap up here. Jordan, anything? First of all, thank you so much again for coming on. Anything you want to let people know that listen to us? I mean, I'm sure they listen to you as well. So agree, but anything you want to give a shout out to?
No, thanks so much for having me on, guys. It was fun. This hour goes really fast because it's fun to talk to you guys, and it's fun to talk, all big picture things with this team right now. Even as bad as they are and as bad as last season was, I still think there's interest and intrigue in the team. I think there always is, bad or good. You have to find the right storylines to hit on and look towards the future. So right now the Flyers are very much in future mode, and we'll see where it goes. But just thanks so much for having me, and it was great seeing you guys.
Yeah, you too. And I agree. These are the most fun guys. It's like unfortunate we have to have them, but they are very fun to have.
Yeah, it's fun to have the topical conversations and kind of go a little bit into like a state of the organization kind of show like this. So it's definitely good. And thanks again, Jordan, for coming on. It was a pleasure.
Oh, my pleasure, guys. Seriously, thanks for having me. And it was great chatting with you guys. And I hope you guys have a great rest of the season. And if you ever need me on again, I'd be happy to do it.
Cool. Yeah, absolutely. I would definitely ask you again. Silly. Anything you want to give a shout out to?
I should have an article up on flyersnittygritty.com coming in the next week or so. So, I mean, check that out, guys. And we appreciate you guys always checking out the website and supporting us. Other than that, though, not too much. So hopefully just get that done and get people reading that one.
Awesome. Well, thank you again both so much. And thank you again, Jordan. Please like, subscribe, share. Shout out to our sponsor. Gym Steaks are still not open yet. Make an announcement when they are. I know they're still going through reconstruction. But again, shout out to them. And thank you again for listening. It means so much. Just like, subscribe, comment, everything. Anything you give us at all is just humongous benefit. So thank you so much. We love you. And remember, always stay gritty.